Hi guys, this is part 2 of the video. If you haven't watched part 1, please click on the link in the description, it'll take you right there. Thanks. Swiftly moving on to the one-handed weapons, let's have a quick look at the mace. I've only equipped the mace, so these two skills here will be for your offhand weapon, which I'll explain in a bit. So your first skill is just a simple strike. It does damage as well as heals you with the 3 separate swings. The second ability, Symbol of Faith, not only does damage, but it also puts a ring around you that gives you some health regeneration, so it certainly is quite a good one for keeping alive. The third ability, Protector Strike, also does damage and then creates a shield around you, and if that shield isn't broken, it explodes doing damage. The one-handed sword is one of my favorites at the moment. Its basic attack is quite simple, just slash attack. Its second attack does damage in a cone in front of it. The second ability, Flashing Blade, also acts as a leap attack that blinds the target so their first couple of attacks miss. The third attack, Zealot's Defense, gets your block duration but also does some really quick attacks that do an awful lot of damage. The Scepter, another one-handed weapon, is one I wouldn't have expected to have seen on a character like this, and I think it adds something quite unique to the actual gameplay. The first attack is a simple, damaging, slow orb that you can use at quite some range, so it's very good for chasing foes or kiting foes. The second one is Smite. This puts an AoE on the ground that does considerable damage and very quickly, but it's very easy in PvP situations for them to move out of. The third ability, which is probably my favorite ability and why I actually use this on my PvP spec, is the ability to enchain someone, and also it increases their vulnerability. So those chains there, keep them in place for a while, which is generally enough to give you time to catch up to them. Moving swiftly on to the offhands, firstly we'll look at the focus weapon. These fill in the 4 to 5 slots on the first bit of your action bar. The first skill on the focus is called Ray of Judgment. This damages enemy, blinds them and makes them miss, as well as gives you a bit of health regeneration on attack, so it's incredibly handy, but the damage isn't that impressive. The second ability, so the action slot number 5, is Shield of Wrath. This ability blocks you in a shield, and if it doesn't explode, it does damage, and quite a lot of damage, and I think that's probably the best reason for it. It will also block attacks for 4 seconds. The Torch is another one of my favorites, and this is quite simply for the burn effects that I use it. This ability burns nearby foes, and if you activate it, it will shoot out a ball of fire and damaging enemies. The fifth button is a flamethrower type effect where you breathe fire and do an awful lot of damage to the enemies as well. The final offhand for a Guardian is the Shield, which I would have assumed would have been one of the most useful ones, but unfortunately I find it very lackluster. The Shield of Judgment does damage in front of you, as well as gives you a buff that protects you, reduces damage taken by 33%, which is handy, but it doesn't last very long to be overly useful. The second attack runner knocks back enemies and puts you in a protective shield, but again it's incredibly short and really isn't that useful compared to some of the other ones. As with all classes, we get different weapons for use underwater, and the Guardians get the trident and the spear. The trident is quite a unique weapon. Its basic attack is a simple damage, as well as when you damage enemies it heals you, so it's quite good, but you'll find most underwater enemies have a massive healing or health regen anyway, so it basically counters that. The second ability is Purify, where you fire a ball in front of you, and when you explode it, it sets them on fire, which when you activate it a second time, and that does an awful lot of fire damage. The third ability is Pillar of Light, and this does a huge amount of damage over time in that specific area, but again they can move out of it. The fourth ability, Refraction, creates a bubble which reflects damage and gives reflection to your enemies, as well as absorbs any incoming damage, so you won't take any. The fifth one is Weight of Justice. This does damage as well as a knockback. The spear I find a lot more aggressive than the trident. Its main abilities all seem to do a little more damage, and they're a bit more focused on getting enemies down quicker rather than staying alive or stopping them. The first ability does just basic damage, whereas the second ability is a very quick fire spear throw that does an awful lot of damage and can really hurt someone underwater. The third ability throws a spear at them and it blinds them as well, so it's not amazing, but it certainly isn't bad. The fourth ability is a really good one. It creates a wall of spears that anyone passing through will take some damage. And finally we have the Wrathful Grasp that pulls enemies towards us as well as burning them, and the burn's quite a lot of damage, so it certainly is an amazing one for the PvP scene. Now let's have a quick look at the skills and traits. The skills are quite straightforward. There's a variety of different types that you have as a guardian. You've got your spirit weapons, your shouts, your symbols, the consecrations on the floor, as well as signets. I won't go into every single skill at the moment, but I'll certainly explain the gist of what they do. So if we have a look at something like the Hammer of Wisdom, which is a spirit weapon, when you summon it, it's got a cast time and then an active ability. Otherwise it just does general damage to your foes. So if we have a look here, the hammer will get going and do a little bit of damage and some knockback. If I activate the ability, however, it knocks them over and does an awful lot of damage, but also gets rid of it. But the hammers, etc., the spirit weapons, only last a little while anyway. So I do suggest experimenting which weapon you prefer if you want to use any at all.